Hello and welcome everybody to Revive Stories. It is so good to be with you again for another episode. We had a fantastic conversation last time around with Sambai, sharing a bit of his story. And today we have got another amazing member of our church at Revive Church, Louise, who is joining us to share a bit of her story. And I really believe it's going to encourage and inspire you today. Louise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Phil. It's really awesome to be here and to have the opportunity to share.
Yeah, man, I'm very excited to hear from you today. And for everybody that's watching, we really hope that this story inspires you today. Again, at Revive Stories, and why we've really been doing this whole series of talks and conversations is we really believe in the power of the testimony. We believe that God is doing something unique and powerful in everybody. And when we take the time to share our personal stories, it really can inspire and even ignite a flame of faith and hope in the people around us. So this is us sharing stories, but the overall encouragement is to wherever you are in your setting, at work or with your family or with other people, to continue to be encouraged to share your story. Louise, we'll start kind of how we like to start these conversations, chat a little bit about childhood, early upbringing. Where did you grow up? What was the formative years like for you? And then we can get into some of the other chats.
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian values-based family. And the reason why I'm saying it like that is because we did not go to church. My dad was not into church. But he certainly was a Christian, and my mom was always a very devout Christian. So growing up, I want to say the Christian values were definitely part of our upbringing. But the only exposure that I had to Christianity and the real stories of Christianity was through religious education at school, because back in the day, that was a subject that it was given. And I do remember kind of thinking that these were just stories. So they had no life for me. It was just words on a paper like any other book.
Yeah.
And that for me was, reflecting back on these questions, that for me was quite insightful, because I didn't actually even realize it until I thought about it some more. And then round about standard 9, so that would be grade 11 now. A friend of mine invited me to a youth group.
Okay.
And, sure, I can't tell you, like, that's where the Bible and the Word and Christianity really came alive for me. And that's where I gave my heart to Jesus, because all of a sudden I could see the connection between the story, the lifestyle, and like what Jesus had really done. So it came alive. It wasn't just words on a page anymore. And so for probably 4 or 5 years, while I still lived in the area, I ended up leaving school, started working, and staying close to the Christian community, and growing in my Christian journey at that point. And that was really good. It was good. It was a really good foundation. And like I say, I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest takeout for me, was just turning those words that were just dead on a page into something real and meaningful in my life. And then I moved out of home and moved into my own home, and work started changing, and I know I drifted away from church. And I often drove past, there used to be a massive big billboard on William Nicol Drive in Sanson that said, "If you feel far from God, guess who moved?" And I have never forgotten that. I've honestly never forgotten that. And it has stayed with me, honestly, my whole life, because for a long time, and when I say a long time, I'm talking probably close to 7 or 8 years, I realized I was not in the place that I needed to be with God. And it came to a head at one point where I was in a position where I had to make some radical life choices with the group of friends that I had. And bless my parents for having instilled Christian values in my life. Even though we didn't go to church, we still had those values. Because I came to a crossroads, literally, where I had to make a decision, knowing that one road would lead literally to a very dark, very bad place, or letting that go. And I let it go. And literally overnight, I lost all my friends, my social setting, like everything. I was on my own.
Sure.
And as hard as that was, I know that it was the right decision. And I know that God protected me through that process. So it didn't feel like it at the time. It felt very, very lonely at the time. But I knew that it was the right decision. And in fact, that became the turning point where I started shifting and turning back to God, and looking for church again, starting to go back to church. And it was there and in that moment, so we're talking almost 20 years ago, where the seed was planted to have a child. Now, I'm a single woman who has just let her entire friendship circle go. This just wasn't on the radar. I didn't know how this was going to happen. And it was literally at that point that I started believing God and saying, you've put this on my heart. This desire kept growing, almost to a point of I couldn't control it anymore. I kept praying into it. And then, interestingly enough, I discovered, because I had explored the area of adoption before, but as a single person at one point in this country, could not adopt as a single person. And so I let it go. I thought, well, maybe it's just hormones, maybe this isn't meant for me. Maybe I've misheard God and I'm like, losing the plot somewhere. But that wouldn't leave me. It just wouldn't leave. And so I hung on to it almost 10 years. And then the law changed. And Nelson Mandela actually changed the legislation that single people could adopt.
Sure.
And at that point, it was like things started to fall into place. I reached out to an adoption agency. They were one of the only adoption agencies prepared to even engage with single people. Most of them that I kind of interviewed as potential partners in the journey were not even prepared to talk to me about it. They didn't believe in single people adopting.
Sure.
So the door got shut in my face a lot. But I found an agency that actually had a specific program that they had developed for single people who were adopting, and went through that process. My goodness, if you ever want to have your life taken apart and investigated to the absolute minutest of details, adopt, because they are not shy to ask you lots of very, very personal questions. But all of a sudden, like I said, it was like the pieces started coming together, and it was okay. It was whatever journey they wanted me to travel, whether it was, getting the police clearance, getting these medical assessments, doing these psychological, whatever they wanted me to do, I just did it because that was part of the journey. And it was literally almost 10 years when I got the call to say, you've been matched with a baby.
Wow.
And so the journey for Gabby and I began at that point. And that's now, almost, it's 12 years ago now.
Sure.
So when I think of, trials and obstacles, you have to be in it for the long game.
Very good.
God is not a genie in a bottle. If he's placed something on your heart, you have to hold on.
Yeah.
And you have to hold on even when it's really difficult.
Yeah, very good.
And trust that instinct. Trust what's laid in your spirit. And that Bible verse that talks about, and God will give you the desires of your heart. I get some people read that as, yes, what's on my heart, God will just give me, like it's a lucky packet.
Yeah.
And I've always read that verse the other way around, that the desire that's on my heart is what God has given me. And it is my responsibility to follow through on that desire until it comes to fruition.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that Gabby and I have traveled a very, very challenging journey,
Yeah.
far more than I ever expected motherhood to be.
Mm.
Not a neurotypical child,
Mm.
and that has opened up a number of other issues that we've had to deal with. But I cannot tell you how many people have said to me, Lou, but that's why she's with you,
Yeah.
because someone else would not have understood the journey she's going on. You get it.
Sure.
I don't feel like I always get it, but I trust that God has put us together. And I
Yeah.
hold on to that when things are difficult, because He has a bigger plan in place. And
Yeah.
He looks with the perspective of eternity. We only see today and we see back,
Mm.
but He looks and sees the whole picture. And so,
Good.
whilst I may not always have the answers for tomorrow, I have to trust that He does.
Yeah.
And that what comes our way tomorrow, He'll be there, because
Mm.
He's down.
Yeah.
Even if I've had to wait, and even if I've had to wait 10 years.
Yeah.
So for me, that turning point of, making that radical life choice to go one way or another, turning my back, literally turning my back on everything I had and
Mm.
starting fresh, was the best thing I ever could have done.
Sure.
But it's, people look at, even I look back and I go, I only sometimes remember, oh yeah, that was great. But sure, at the time, day by day, those things were really hard.
Sure. Louise, wow,
Yeah.
there's so much so much, good stuff that you're sharing, and man, so helpful. I've got to channel my own thoughts here because I've got hundreds of questions that I'd love to ask, but we only have so much time. I know a little bit about your journey. Obviously, we've been doing church together for a long time, and you've always been someone that I found incredibly faithful, incredibly obedient, um, just someone who was consistent. And for me, and the experiences that I've had in life, I've learned to admire consistent and obedient people, because I think gifting is awesome and gifting kind of gets you through the door. And I think you're a gifted person as well. But it's people that have learned to be consistent and obedient in their faith that almost, like you're saying, it's that you got to be in it for the long haul. It's this marathon. And what
Yeah.
inspires me is someone who can go hard for God at age 15 or 20 or 25 when they meet Him for the first time. And then, at 75, 80 years old, you're finding someone who still loves God as much or even more. And for me, you strike me as that person. You're not 75 or 80 years old yet, but I have a almost this sense that will be your story. I want to kind of conclude with two questions. The one would be kind of, let's chat a little bit about Gabby and the adoption process. It has been, well, not really be a process, more your guys' life together. There have been some very challenging moments. What role do you think, you being a Christian with the Christian values that have been instilled in you, and you trying to honor God with your life, what role has that played with you in handling the challenges of motherhood and some of the things that you've had to encounter that haven't been expected, or something that you were prepared for as a part of this journey? If that question makes sense.
No, absolutely. So, Phil, I can say without a doubt that without God and without
Mm.
my church family, I would not be sitting here today.
Sure.
There are days when, if it wasn't for that absolute trust that God's got this, and those days when I literally sit curled up in a ball crying out to
Yeah.
God, and I mean literally agonizing, crying out, going, please give me wisdom to deal with this situation. I
Mm.
don't know how I would cope with that without having someone to reach out to. I honestly don't know.
Wow.
And coupled with that very, very strongly, and I think this is this is the golden nugget for me, is
Yeah.
over time, and to your point around consistency, if you're going to go for God, then for me, you've got to be all in.
Yeah.
And so that means being part of the church family and being committed to people within your church family and even within a life group, because that's where you do life together.
Very
And there
good.
are people in my life group who at times at 10 o'clock at night were driving to my house to help me.
Wow.
And I could not have coped through those really, really difficult times without those people. They literally were the embodiment. It was like God had sent these people my way to help me cope with the journey.
Sure.
And I think there are lots of people who say, oh no, well, I don't need to go to church and I don't need to be part of a life group. I'm kind of doing Christianity on my own. And I'm going, okay, if that's your choice. But for me, that's not been the journey. I've needed church. I have needed the people. I've needed that community to hold my hand, because the rest of the world is not going to be kind to you.
Yeah.
And I think you're missing out on amazing things God has for you if you just do your Christian walk on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without church, without life group, honestly, Phil, I would not be here.
Jeez. It's wisdom, man. That's so good. And I think, Louise, maybe even as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to ask a question about advice. And, if you could give, one golden nugget, as you mentioned there, to somebody, but based on your experiences, based on how you've seen God come through for you, on the mountaintops, in the valleys, if you were to chat to somebody maybe that's newer to faith or experiencing something similar as to what you've gone through, maybe what's one thing that you'd ask them to hold on to or piece of advice you'd give them?
Stick with it. So your point around consistency earlier, there are many days when I woke up on a Sunday morning and didn't feel like going to church.
Yeah.
And got up and we went. There are days when I didn't feel like going to life group, but we got up and we went. So you commit and you stay committed and you be consistent, because sometimes it's also not about you.
Yeah.
You will sometimes go and encounter someone and they're also going through a rough time, and
So
you
good.
can share. Or they can see you're going through a rough time and they share something with you. Sometimes that hug from someone makes the world of difference. But if you're going to isolate yourself and stay away from the world, then you are going to feel that God is far.
Yeah, very true.
You want to feel that God is close? Yes, you need to do the devotionals. You need to do your quiet time. You need to do your Bible. Yes, do those things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you need to connect with people, because God will use people to connect with you.
Yeah.
And for me, it's around, really dig deep and stay committed, stay consistent. Because that could be the very thing that you need to pull you through.
Wow. Jeez, that's so good. I feel like that's been a common theme of your story as we've shared now, and I feel that's so apt to close on. Thank you, Louise. Man, really appreciate you taking the time to share a bit. It's been very helpful.
Awesome.
Amazing. And for everybody that's joined us today and watched this video, if this has been helpful to you, let us know. You can leave a comment on this video and let us know how it's helped you. But also, you can also share this video to friends and people that have maybe gone through something similar as Louise, and as someone who's come out on the other side. Such great wisdom and is still in the process of journeying with God. Great insights there for people that can take and apply. We appreciate you. Continue to stick with us in this Revive Story journey as we find out more stories. And again, be encouraged with the fact that your story is powerful. It's unique to you. God is working in your life, and he will continue to do so. Let's take every opportunity to share it, share of the goodness and the faithfulness of God. God bless you, and we'll see you again soon.